He was right.
That's right.
Hey, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Mike Gibb. I run accountrecovery.net, and I want to welcome you to today's webinar, which is a conversation about AI and compliance. Artificial intelligence is playing a growing role in improving compliance and operational efficiency across the accounts receivable management industry. But we are still in the crawl phase of development. Understanding the capacity and opportunity that AI offers, especially in the area of compliance, is incredibly beneficial. So today, in this webinar, which is being sponsored by Skit.ai, we've got a panel of experts here to discuss AI and compliance and collections. They're going to break down the results of an industry-wide survey that I'll share a link for if you haven't already downloaded a copy. And they're here to share their insights to help you chart your own way forward in this important area of development. As I mentioned, this webinar is being sponsored by Skit.ai. Skit.ai is the accounts and receivables industry's leading conversational voice AI company, enabling collection agencies to streamline and accelerate revenue recovery. Skit.ai's compliant, configurable, and easy-to-deploy solution enables businesses to automate nearly 1 million weekly consumer conversations. Skit.ai has been awarded several recognitions, including Disruptive Technology of the Year by CCW, the Stevie Bronze winner by the International Business Awards, and Startup of the Year in Artificial Intelligence by Entrepreneur India. Skit.ai is headquartered in New York City, and you can learn more about them by visiting them at skit.ai. Let me just click and drop a link right there in the chat that you can use to visit their website, and I encourage everybody to do so. Let me now introduce you to our panelists. Ray Cox is a seasoned business consultant and AI evangelist with more than 30 years of experience. His unique background blends expertise in the accounts receivable, process optimization, regulatory compliance, and cutting-edge AI implementation, empowering companies to harness the transformative power of AI. He brings a proven track record of delivering future-focused solutions that elevate personal performance and propel businesses forward. As the founder of Strategy 3, they provide customized AI consulting and solutions tailored to the unique needs of the accounts receivable teams, demystifying AI and showcasing practical applications to reduce costs, improve customer and debtor experiences, and boost recoveries. Pratik Gupta is a director at Skit.ai. He has worked solely on U.S. debt collection understanding compliance, and baking them into Skit's product offering and exploring growth opportunities. Ralph Hall is the Vice President of Data Management at Professional Credit, working out of their Vancouver, Washington office. His team is responsible for all automation, new client implementations, EDI with clients and vendors, reporting, and keeping the data clean. He has been in the ARM industry for more than 17 years and is always involved in the software and data side of the party. Porter Heath Morgan is an attorney and advisor who partners with clients to help their compliance and leadership initiatives. Heath is a third-generation collection attorney who has grown up in the industry and has 19 years of in-house counsel experience for collection agencies, collection law firms, debt buyers, healthcare providers, and technology companies. Heath is passionate about training and education and is a frequent speaker for ACA, NCBA, and RMAI, and serves on the ACA Council of Delegates, while also being a founding member of the Colorado Creditors Bar Association, where he serves on the board of directors and as the CLE committee chair. Heath is licensed in Colorado, Kansas, Oklahoma, and Wyoming, and is a member of the Supreme Court Bar. Everybody who's watching us live today is absolutely invited to ask questions and submit comments during the course of our webinar. You can use the chat or the Q&A to submit your questions or comments. If you wish to participate anonymously, click on the anonymous button in the Q&A, and anything we receive from you is sent anonymously. Heath, compliance disclosure, are we good?
We're good. We'll cover it as we go.
All right, we're going to skip that and get right to our conversation. So the first thing I want to do is just sort of discuss high level how you see AI is transforming compliance operations and improving overall efficiency in the ARM industry. Ray, I said last in, had to answer first, so unfortunately that's you.
I thought he was kidding. I guess not. It did take me a while to find the webinar button, so my bad. Okay.
No worries.
Well, AI is a fascinating subject that a lot of people aren't nearly as familiar with as they probably should be. There's a lot of things going on. There's people trying to make rules and regulations and all sorts of things in AI. And if we're ignoring it, it'd be like ignoring the something from the CFPB that directly impacts our industry. So I encourage you wholeheartedly to be involved in the conversation of AI. As far as compliance goes, strategy cubed, it's actually strategy cubed, but you can't make it look like cubed, when you're typing in things. But we're a team of consultants that's really passionate about AI. There's a number of consultants that are on my team. You may have heard of Matt Kiefer and Jeremy Mates. They're involved with me and in helping to do all sorts of things from compliance to a lot of other integrations and optimizations. So we are very passionate about the industry. We've been doing this a long time, and we want people to feel like there are people in the industry that are trying to show more about the how. Now, companies like Skid AI are doing an amazing job of providing some of the most obvious ways to implement AI, but there are so many other ways to go. And when it comes to tools that will help you with compliance, we've already created some, and we want to create more. In fact, the adage, what keeps you up at night, is something that is one of our guiding lights. So we're excited about providing some of these tools and focusing on the how to use AI, even if you're a small agency. Did that answer the question?
A little bit, kind of. Keith, I'll kind of let you weigh in now. How do you see AI transforming compliance operations and improving efficiency in the arm industry today?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be excited about. I mean, I think, having vendors and having companies explore this space and how we can automate with AI technology is a great thing. The caveat to that is that we are still roughly in year one, maybe barely crossing into year two of what will be, essentially a decade of AI implementation across, companies and across the industry. That's a good thing and a bad thing, right? There's a lot of new products, new exciting ways to optimize efficiency and increase the accuracy, which are huge. But we're also still ahead of a lot of regulations. So, when you're looking at implementing this, technology, it's important to kind of create your own safeguards and your safeguard checklist as to what could be regulated in the future. Now, we've seen a couple states this year pass state data private AI bills. Colorado, where I'm from, passed one, and that's one I've been circling around to some clients to let them see, because it talks about machine learning and some algorithms with there. Because one thing that we don't have clarity on is the definition of AI, and there's a lot of vendors and a lot of companies out there that claim to have AI or artificial intelligence technology that really isn't AI technology. It's more of a machine learning, if this, then that outcomes. And the problem with that's fine for marketing purposes, but the problem we see is that some of these regulators, they just paint a broad brush on what AI technology is, even if a lot of technology is not truly AI. So you could have an automation system, for example, or machine learning system internal to your system that you've been using for 5, 6, 7 years. And some state comes in and says, we're going to call that AI now. Now we need to look at how we are interacting with that system, that software system within your company. But the good news is it is just year one and year two. The analogy I've given before is that if you think back to 94, 95, when Yahoo was a search engine, if you remember, we would go to the actual Yahoo page and then scroll down a list of links for news, weather, and sports to find out, what website we're going to. But, it wasn't until, 4 or 5 years later till Google launched with actually a typable search engine in there. But, the only thing I would say right now in terms of how, absolutely, if you can incorporate it within your company, there's tons of ways to automate that and increase the efficiency of your company. And the last thing I'll leave before I'll pivot to Ralph or the others on the panel here is that, you know, how I look at AI technology, I classify it in 3 different ways. I classify it as generative AI, conversational AI, and robotic process automation. Again, most automatic, you know, process automation is not truly AI, but we are seeing enough legislatures out there and legislation proposed that's looping that in, that I think it's important to treat it the same way as AI technology.
Yeah, that's fantastic definitions. I think those definitions are really important. I was listening to something this morning, excuse me, actually about, I think it was in 1995 that Big Blue beat Kaspersky, whatever his name is, right? The Grandmaster. So that was some years ago. And then 10 years ago, I think, is it 10 that, or maybe it was probably 10 years ago, if I remember right this morning. This is just, I didn't read this, I just off memory here, but that's when a machine beat every Nintendo, not Nintendo, every Atari game against a player, right? And they didn't think that would ever happen. And I think the Microsoft guy over AI was talking about this recently, yesterday maybe, and said that it's since that time, it's the power available has increased by like 5 billion times or some crazy number. And so it's really dramatic. I think we're on the very, very, very front end of all of this. And I think it's really big. And I think that if we think it's going to go away, we're wrong. There's no way this is going away. This is, so, you know, we often talk about time, cost, and quality, and you generally historically get to fix 2 of those 3 things. Is you can either spend more, so your costs go up to improve your time and quality, but you don't get to spend less and have time and quality improve unless there's some kind of field level change. And the internet was one of those. And I think AI is one of those. And so there are a ton of things of how it affects this industry. I think consistency, when you have when, you know, Heath talked about like RPA, where you're given instructions. When you're telling it what to do, you take out the inconsistencies. If you're using Skid AI for outbound calling, for example, like we do, we tell it what to do and what to say and when to say it. And so we have control over that. And that's going to be consistently handling that. When we're talking about true AI and decision-making outside, there's this really kind of fundamental difference in my mind that is like with RPA, I make all the decisions for the tool. I tell it what to do, and the tool does amazing things with it. Maybe how it does those things is cool. But with AI, someone else out there has told it how to respond to my inputs and has trained it how to respond to those things. And so so it introduces this level of complexity to it. But this is a change that's coming, and it's coming fast and furious, and it's changing so incredibly fast. And so to me, one of the things back in the day doing implementations with Cubs, which we didn't call it then because the Major League Baseball was concerned that we were confusing people about the Cubs. I don't know how that worked, but we actually, apparently, I'm told, for your Trivial Pursuit endeavors there was actually a cease and desist letter. So some attorney somewhere. But even back then, when I would go into implement Columbia Ultimate software into organizations, I would always talk to the clients about change management. It's like, how are you preparing your people for this? Because if you have your superstar collector who is fantastic on their old software and you put them on a new software, if you don't involve them early enough, they're going to lose all of their, I want to say all their, and don't mean the wrong way, all their power, really, because they were the go-to person for the software that they've been on for 20 years. And now you're asking them to lose all of that and become a neophyte in this new thing. So change management going into AI is a big deal. I think however we're going to be using it, we've got to address the people part of this. And don't just think that because I'm excited about it, that everybody else is excited about it. If whatever I understand about it, that everybody else understands as much or as little, or, you know, we're all over the place and we're human, and humans are building this, and it's just really complex, but it's coming, and we're going to have to figure out how to deal with it and get our hearts and minds around how we are going to handle it and deal with it. So that's a little bit of the structure around it. In my mind, that's really important that as we talk about the technical pieces of it, that we're thinking about the human parts of it as well.
Right. Absolutely, Ralph. And I think you touched upon some really important pointers. AI is here, right? And like you mentioned, I don't know whether it is 5 billion times or not, but Moore's law basically says that the processing capacity doubles almost every year. So wherever it is right now, you're only going to see a significant amount of improvement in the years to come. And we are already at a stage where the conversations that these technologies are able to have are very, very similar to how they mimic a human, right? So to extents that for the first 30 seconds you might be confused whether it's a human or a machine talking, right? So it's here, like everyone else has said, it's always encouraged to adopt this technology sooner than later. The other thing that Ralph, you mentioned is that once the bot is, or any technology is trained to do a certain task, it can do that repetitively without any emotional baggage, without any fatigue, without any memory lapses, without just having a hard time, and it never forgets to do that. That's where I believe the biggest advantage to compliance comes in. Now, I'm not really sure of how compliance teams are automating their tasks, but I'm sure when they come to audit certain conversations that either a human or a technology has had with the consumer, the the task becomes easier because it's much more structured. The basics are always covered. You could always query those results and things like that, right? And so it makes it much more easier to kind of automate a technology. Audit a technology like that. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, just to add to that real quickly, and to Ralph's point about how far we've come with this, right? We know our regulators, the CFPB, is using automation AI technology to listen to the calls of the agencies or entities that they are auditing, right? They're no longer using humans for that role, and so if it's good enough for the CFPB, it should be good enough for your company, especially because you don't want the first time your entire call log is audited by by someone, it's from the CFPB and not yourself internally. And to what you were saying earlier, the prone to accuracy, the prone to mistakes that humans can make, you just eliminate that altogether. Now, as to the compliance departments, the same thing, right? If you've got a QA aspect of your compliance department, those can also be automated and kind of remove the mistakes, just like you're removing phone agent mistakes on phone calls, right? There's a lot of back end, automation that can be done in terms of file transfer format, conversion over. There's a lot of great ways to use it for compliance, especially when, I've said this before, compliance can often be important tasks, but not necessarily urgent. So especially if it's a systemic review process once a quarter, once a year, and you've got a date and a calendar date marked on your calendar, but something else comes up and it gets pushed to next week and then the week after, and then you've gone several months, right? A lot of that is because you're asking and compliance employees who it's not part of their day-to-day job to do certain tasks. Well, if you can automate those tasks and have AI or automation do that, and then your employees are just reviewing the outputs of that saves you a lot of time and increases your overall efficiency.
Yeah. Heath, that's exactly one of our major processes is how do we get people, if you're you mentioned the quadrant 2, where do you live in quadrant 2, which is things are important but not urgent. Most of us today live in quadrant 1, which is everything's urgent and everything's important. And that means that we're like fire people with our little fire hats on, putting out fires. That's all we do. In fact, there's a whole bunch of stuff that talks about that urgency paradigm that most people are addicted to. The nice thing about generative AI, well, there's a downside to generative AI too. It's a lot like when we used to talk about the concept of garbage in, garbage out as it pertained to databases. You know, if you put in bad stuff, you're going to get out bad stuff, corruption and whatnot. The same thing applies here to AI. If you put in good stuff, the right information, the right things that need to happen, then you're going to get the right output. And that's the important thing about it, this idea of garbage in, garbage out. So if you do it right, then you're going to be happy. I don't know how many of you remember that that article a while ago, a few months back, about Air Canada, where they had a chat bot that thought it'd be really cool to refund anybody's money that asked. You know, that obviously wasn't what was intended by the airline, but they didn't think through all the processes and all the things that could possibly happen, and you know, it cost them. So I think that the concept of using this solution to free people from the chains of busy work is really an impactful and powerful tool. You know, what, just as an example, we have people that are doing RFPs, and I personally have done those in the past, and they can take many weeks and lots of people to generate all the stuff that's needed. Well, we've created an AI agent that can actually do an RFP process in a much faster time, including answer all the questions. Now, does that mean that you're gonna take all that? Because there's still hallucination that's possible, but you're not gonna just take all that at face value. You've got to look at it. But the process that you go through to do that is significantly sped up simply because you've used a tool that can take into consideration a lot of things that you don't have to worry about. And I think that is where what Heath was talking about, this concept of hanging out in quadrant 2, will empower everybody in our industry to focus so much more on what they do, which is collections. In fact, so much so, you don't even have to learn AI to benefit from it. I mean, you know, that's what some of us are here for, to help you with. You know, so if you're worried about learning it or another thing to do, or cost or scale or whatever, all those kinds of things are easily overcome.
Absolutely. Ren, you mentioned about the cost. I think because of that compute power getting cheaper and cheaper by the day, I don't think today it costs even a fraction of you know, what a human agent would cost, for sure. So the technology is getting more and more accessible. You know, everyone can use it. And you know, you said that agencies can focus on collections. I would say it can even collect on some of those easier accounts. What the way you know, we position it, what anything that is repetitive, anything that is a low-hanging fruit, anything that does not require human intelligence should be automated, so that the human capital that you have focuses on the right tasks. Maybe their tasks are reduced, and that's when you get better quality. Your top collector will get an opportunity to work more on the difficult accounts than working on those lower balances which were due, you know, 2 months ago. They don't really, you know, you don't really need a very high EQ to be able to collect on those accounts. And that's where automation brings in, you know, not just you know, other things, but collections as well. And you know, applicable, I'm just taking the example of collections, but applicable to anything.
Yeah, and there are a lot of consumers that would prefer not to talk to a human being. Now, some of us may be a little bit older, not a lot, but a little bit older, might think that's weird, but there are a lot of people who are, they're embarrassed. I mean, this is not new, right? It's just there's a new option now. We were on one of these, or actually maybe the Nerd Hub or whatever, a few weeks ago, and somebody said, if you haven't used at least conversational AI or chat AI to make to enable a consumer to pay 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you're behind. That was kind of their definition. It's like that's the kind of the bare minimum of where we should be. But again, for some people, it's like, no, I'm not there yet. I can't afford that. I don't know. And I think to a lot of us, it's a foreign language, right? I mean, we throw away things, Ray mentioned hallucinations. You know, that means something to somebody who grew up in the 60s differently maybe than today. But for AI, that's where it's making stuff up. You know, we've talked before in this forum about the case in Florida where the attorneys submitted court documents and the AI made up some court cases that were purportedly decided in that particular court, which never happened. And so and how it decided it could do that is kind of a bit of a mystery to me, because somebody had to program it to say that's okay, or leave the window open for that to happen. But there's a lot of interesting things, and understanding what it can and can't do. I mean, if you think about AI, so one thing, Mike, I want to correct that chat you said there, where robotic process automation is not AI. And so that's one thing that ACA has asked us to keep careful too, because of what Heath's point about legislation about AI. We do not want RPA rolled up in some AI legislation that restricts it in any way, because it's just doing what I tell it to do. Even if I tell it to do the wrong thing, just like I might tell Bob, the new collector, to do the wrong thing, and he does it wrong, but he might be smart to say, hey, that doesn't sound right. Are you sure? And AI or RPA is not going to do that. It's just going to do it. The good news is that it'll do it the same way every time wrong. So it should be easier to fix when you figure out that you told it to do the wrong thing. But there's just a lot here. There's a lot of things, you know. So AI might mean that I still tell the voice bot what to do, and we make all the decision tree, and it can only say these prompts, answer these prompts. But then the intelligence part is tone, inflection, what language to use, and that predictive modeling of what, you know, using statistics to decide what word comes next. And we used an inbound tool, and now we use an outbound tool with Skid AI that on our inbound tool that we were using, when I first heard it, I was like, are we telling people that this is not a person? Because I would want to know that, because I wouldn't have guessed that right off the bat. So things are just, again, this changing quickly. There's a ton of things we can do with that, but we just really need to understand the language. So if you don't know the language, you're going to have to learn it, just like you'd have to learn French or Spanish or whatever language you're going to start doing business in that country. It just like automation, you know, cars versus horses and buggy whips and that, you know, perennial story. We're going to have to learn it. We're going to have to figure out how to play in this space. And it's hard because it changes so fast. And the cool big app today is going to be old news in 6 months. And there'll be 16 new ones. And so just like every new industry, it's going to explode, and then it's going to consolidate. It's going to do that somehow. And Heath is writing a really cool book on that. Plug. But yeah, it's a really, really cool time to be alive and be in this industry, in any industry right now.
Mm-hmm. So Ralph, I mean, is there actually someone that would actually like to talk to a collector, a bill collector?
Some people, yeah. And so we've had 2 complaints with that one. One was I asked to talk to a person. Sorry. They asked to talk to a bot, and they complained that we kept sending them to Grace. And it's like, that is a bot. No, it's not. And the other one is they thought they were talking to a person, found out it was a bot later. So those were 2 complaints there. So yeah, there are people who would rather talk to a human being who can talk about the grandkids too, which, you know, Grace is not going to do.
Yeah.
So
that's fascinating. I mean, I've almost everybody I've talked to is like, you know, because they don't answer the phone. You know, if you're calling them and you're a person and you're a bill collector, no one answers the phone anymore because they don't want to talk to a bill collector or someone who's trying to rob them or somebody who's trying to sell them something. You know, it's the communication structure has changed so dynamically, especially when you start looking at deep fakes and all the dark side. You know, there's the law of opposites is a true law. You know, for every good thing that you can do in AI, you can do bad. And I think understanding that, like to Ralph's point, you know, being educated and at least wise to what's going on is hugely important, because you just don't want to get stuck in one of those things where you're one of the topics of discussion on the evening news. You know, it's but there's a lot of things happening, and I'm a little passionate about this advocacy part, because every system, if they haven't already done so, are building what they call AI wrappers to go around their products. And it's a way to add a little extra money in their coffers. And sure, it will help you a little bit, but it will only help you in their tool. What we need, and pardon the Lord of the Rings analogy, we really need one ring to rule them all. So you need something that looks at your industry, your entity holistically, and the 10 to 20 separate things that you've got going on in there, and goes, okay, how can we optimize this? How can we help you with it? And AI is phenomenal at that kind of stuff. Again, if it's done correctly, it's got to be done right. And people start freaking out about that last part. But I think that is something that people can use a lot of, that concept of one ring to rule them all. And also, do not be really careful, that your information is being protected, when you're using AI, because most AI is not protecting your data. It's using anything you put into it to optimize itself, and which means it's also available to outside entities who know what they're doing, and they're not scrubbing for PHI or PII. I mean, and I know you all have heard these things before, but there are companies out there. I'm not going to shamelessly plug us, but there are companies out there that, I guess I just did, sorry, but that can actually help you when it comes to protection of data and the security of things that are super important. I mean, we always have had, as an industry, a big giant bullseye on our back anyway. We're the first ones that people complain about. So, anything you can do to avoid someone pointing at that bullseye is always a plus.
Absolutely. I think,
Mike,
please
go
go ahead.
No,
Okay.
I know Mike was going to ask the next question. I did want to follow up real quickly on your question to Ralph about consumers wanting to speak to live agents versus the AI. And actually, the CFPB last June put out a publication on conversational chatbots. That's actually a really good read for everyone that's looking to explore this, because it found that all 10 of the top 10 banks are using conversational chatbots, and it found it's based off of a number of complaints of the ability to have human intervention in there, but there's other safeguards there that you want to look out and look out for as you're looking at the conversational AI aspect of it.
Absolutely. And Ray, to your point on the usage or misusage of data, so to say, while that was the traditional way of how what Heath was mentioning, machine learning and the rule-based systems, right? That was prevalent there more. Today, with large language models, a lot of these, most of these open source models that we see are trained on huge amounts of data, right? And OpenAI, for example, that model is trained on 189 billion parameters. Now, if I take a few thousand data points and feed it to the model, it's not going to make or break the model, right? So things have slightly changed. As on today, a lot of the AI companies do not use fresh customer or consumer data to train the models. Now, that data might still be required for running the process in some way, but that's not, as on today, most of the people are not putting that data into the model to train it and make it better. Those are mostly human interventions. For example, if there is a certain pattern that I find that the model is not behaving correctly, I will need to manually intervene and instruct the model to behave in a certain way. But that's mostly a human analyzing the data, figuring out the impact of it on the deployment, and instructing or guiding the model to do certain things. But the training of the base model is more or less fixed, because the model is only trained to know how to talk. What to say and when to say it is something that we control. That's on the data piece. So data broadly is still protected today.
I guess my major point isn't so much about the training of the model, because that's largely done before it's even opened. I agree with that completely. My concern has been in the PHI or PII, and it's simply not being filtered out. That's not the AI's fault. There's no fault there, but there needs to be some protections in place that make sure that data does not leave your space. And that's some of the stuff that I've been focusing on, because if there isn't a law about it now, there kind of is. There will be, and there'll be all sorts of things like to Heath's point that you're going to have to prepare for. You should hope for the best and assume the worst. And that's how your litigation is going to show up.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll jump in here for a second. We've got a few questions that have come in during the audience during the conversation, and I want to make sure we get a chance to address those. The first is, in training on data that is created by others, such as conversations, how are the rights to such data handled? Thus far, AI has largely been based on public data, such as large language models, learning from Wikipedia, etc. But it's a different ballgame when training a large language model on, say, customer service conversations over the phone. Where do you see this going in the next few years?
So I touched upon it a little bit.
Right.
The Wikipedia side, I would leave it to the experts to kind of handle it. Those are, very open source models available to public. Anyone can access it. So I'll leave that part. Maybe Heath, you can touch upon it a little bit. But I think the usage of consumer data is where I can pitch in and say that, that consumer data, the conversation that you're having on the customer service conversations, that as a conversation is never getting treated, is never getting used to train the model further. Even in the I did reference that back in the day we used to use some of this data, but the way the data is used, and I'll need to get a little technical, and more than happy to do that. But the way that data is used, if someone catches, let's gets hold of one packet of information, there is absolutely no way, even if it is PII, by the way. If let's say my last four of my social is 1234, all you will hear me say is 1234 and absolutely nothing. Even if I say my last four of my social is 1234, without the conversation that happened before or after, there is no value of that data in the market. So, and again, even this kind of exposure used to happen in the past. As on today, this does not exist.
I know there's a tool I follow that's Elios Health is a company that works in the behavioral health space. So they've got all the PHI information, and that's really critical to that industry, as it is with healthcare too, but for behavioral health in particular. And their CIO had said that their tool is designed to de-identify that data. They know what it is. They have a tool that listens. It does a note taking for the clinician. So at the end of the session, it presents, here are some notes you could use, and it significantly cuts down the note taking time for the counselor, psychiatrist, therapist. And it also does things like says, hey, you talked 52% of the time, it's a little high, or the patient mentioned this 6 times, a story, or talked about suicide, or these real serious things, and it's looking for trends and saying, oh, by the way, you use these clinical models that you should be using, and you did a good job with that, but it does a really good job analyzing it as well, because it's trained for that industry. And I think that when we as an industry get some good models that are trained for the industry, that's going to really start to have an impact. And all that de-identification of PHI and PII is going to have to be built into that. And I think we're, maybe people on this call, on the presenter side or the other side of the call, are going to be the ones to do that. But there's a great opportunity there for us to do that. That's going to have to pass a bunch of levels of security for us to be able to reliably use it, I think.
Yeah, I think that's where really, the fact that we're just in year 1 or year 2 of this really matters, because the question is right? Most of the open models that are free and accessible right now are collecting your data. Now, they're great for giving you use cases for how to use it, but we're already seeing systems like Olama or Orange or GPT for All that are allowing you to use your own internal database and not export data to AI, not share it with other things. And that will come as you look at this technology and look to onboard it. and you start asking vendors, well, do you share this with AI? No, or yes, we do. You're going to move on and choose the ones that don't do this. So it's very much, we're in the early stages of the evolution and of onboarding and adoption of this technology.
We're actually building AI models that reside within the framework of the organization. So, so there's no risk of anything leaving your firewall beyond the realm of your firewall because it's within your system. The other thing I want us to reference, because you mentioned something, Mike Gibb, in your question, was about this idea of ownership. Who owns some of this content? Well, I can tell you when it comes to things like creation of videos or other things that are using AI to generate, like say, training videos, for example, the entities that are significant in that space and in many other spaces when it comes to ownership. I mean, don't even get me started about like, is it art or not, right? Because that's a whole nother world. But just in the idea of ownership, they are, if you use a tool to create something, that content is yours. Universally, everyone I've asked. Now, somebody may come along, so always ask that question. You want to make sure if you're building content when it comes to training or structure to be able to do that. Because I'll tell you, if you really want to save some time, effort, and energy, if you're building training videos, I mean, there is nothing better because there's no, I mean, all you have to do is change the actual text, that's being used, and the whole video is updated. I mean, it's like nothing you've ever seen or used before. It's amazing. But you want to make sure that the company you're using that's giving you that power and flexibility is that content is truly yours. So far, everyone I've talked to, it is.
Yeah, that's still it's a great point, Ray, but it's still, the Copyright Office is not caught up with legislation, right? They have an RFI that was done last fall. They issued a ruling that content generated with ChatGPT is not copyrightable. But to your point, there's no reason, if you own all of the data that's being input in there and you're telling it how to export it, that you shouldn't have that copyright ownership to the exported aspects of it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's just one of those things, right? That you have to be careful that you don't get lost in the minutia of the unknown. And things could change anytime. But I agree with you, Heath. That's exactly the I think the position. I'm a little optimistic on where it's headed.
I'm not an expert here, but I think somewhere I read that for you to be able to own a content that is generated by a tool, there needs to be some significant human involvement in generating that content as well. Is that a requirement, or that's something that is
Well,
because you're instructions?
that rationale was used in the Copyrights Office's decision on the ChatGPT content. It has not been tested out on a content that was wholly owned already by the artist. So again, it was a limited ruling based off of a free model where you had no input to all the original data. So that we're still in that gray area, and obviously we still have all the OpenAI lawsuits out there, and there's a question of whether it's a black box algorithm that ChatGPT uses, or whether it's widespread copyright infringement that ChatGPT uses for its training data.
It's going to get interesting. I mean, like you said, I mean, June is the 2-year anniversary of ChatGPT. 2 years. In fact, I would postulate that if you talk to anyone that claims to be an expert in AI, that's BS. It's just too new to know on too many levels. You just have to be careful. You can be passionate about it, you can use it, you can do all sorts of cool things, but it's going to be a while before we get some true experts. I can only think of 2 in the entire world that I would consider an expert. That is not a very lot of people.
Let's see here. In your experiences, what are the top 3 automation requests that collection agencies have today that AI can accomplish in a compliant and defensible manner? May need
Ralph,
that
you want to
disclaimer
start that
now,
one?
Heath.
Yeah. So actually, I'm going to use the from someone, I'll use her story without permission. So if you're on this call, please chat in. I'm sorry. So we were in the Nerd Hub thing a couple weeks ago, and she said that she uses Copilot, and I'm so sorry I forgot her name. But she uses Copilot to, when there's a new piece of legislation, she dumps it into Copilot and just says, hey, could you give me a summary that includes, and she had a list of prompts that she uses. She asked for, who does it cover? What are the restrictions? What are the permissions? And there are a couple other little things there, and asked for just a summary. So she gets a 1 or 2 page summary and in English, and then create 3 slides for training and create a client facing letter that I can send to my clients that will explain the impact of this to them. And she said it takes like 20 minutes. So if you're on this chat me the real information. but it was a great story. It's a fantastic example of here's using AI that can actually look at something and analyze it, and do that. Another example from our space is where robotic automation tools are adding AI. So it's not AI, but they can have AI pieces there. So if we have a client that sends us twice a year this giant multiple 1,000-page list of accounts, and it's not terribly pretty, and we need to screen scrape it, get into spreadsheets so we can use it. So traditionally what you do is you say, okay, go out here and look for this string, and then find this string, and whatever's in between that, put it in this field, and you map that, you write the code for all of that. The AI piece of this goes through and says, hey, let me sweep through the document, and it will go ahead and suggest and say, hey, I think these are some data elements you might want, and I think they're named this. Is that correct? And so it's doing that work for me. And I think, Heath, you and I talked about this in January about, I think you called it a ChatGPT a procrastination killer. Was that you?
Yeah.
So it's like getting started on this stuff. And that project, every 6 months, we're like, oh, the file's back. And the script that we wrote last time isn't quite going to work. And now we can have this tool go through and do some of that thinking for us. And then we're just confirming that it's right. And it just cuts a ton of time out. So those are 2.
Now I know you're stopping short at the automation because you don't want to call that AI, but I think we should call out the importance of automation as well, because that is where we're seeing, especially when we're talking about a compliant and safe manner of implementing this technology. Process automation is a great way to do that. And the way I see it with my clients is usually it's it's what pain points you have. What's the biggest ROI? Like, what's the biggest cost savings that you can get? Or where do we have the biggest pain with staffing and retention of employees of the mundane, repetitive tasks over and over again? And just some examples of that, I've seen, e-filing is a big one for agencies and law firms that sue. Having bots and AI and technology that can actually file those cases for you electronically, that's a huge cost savings. I've seen it implemented with consumer communications. So instead of using a letter vendor or email vendor, you're actually having a bot to send out all of your outbound emails to. That's a huge cost savings. But then on the back end, as far as the the pain point of employee staffing, I've seen data interface uploading where you're taking client files and putting them in your system. That's a huge way, because some of those employees there's turnover there, and it's just a mundane, repetitive process that can be automated that we're seeing a lot of benefit and lift to.
Yeah, and if you're going to throw RPA in the discussion, then I've got a million examples.
Yeah,
that opens a whole nother.
I know. That's why I did it, Ralph.
So come to ACA in July, and we'll talk about that for an hour and 15 minutes with you. I've got a presentation on that in July, so look forward to that. But yes, and as I will say there, and I've said before, I've had exactly 0 people come to me and say, Ralph, I'm really ticked off at you for automating that thing that I hated doing, or that repetitive thing. I hate it. You ruined my life because I don't get to do that stupid task anymore. No one's ever said that.
Yeah. Well, focusing. So the first thing you talked about, Ralph, about that one lady that, was using the Copilot for that purpose. We've created very, just to endorse that idea. We've created tools that will literally digest everything from the government CFPB, FTC, everybody digest all that information. And then there's a question line, and you can ask any question you want of the data, and it will provide you an answer. It'll give you, page and paragraph and whatever, so for reference. And then you can go to your legal counsel and you can say, okay, I've been doing some research and this is what I found, yay or nay. What's your opinion? I mean, it can really expedite things. It can free up someone like Heath's time where, he doesn't have to do a ton of research, or maybe he's using the same tool, but it makes it really powerful. And we've added a variant on that where in Florida, they've come up with some new rules and regulations. And so we've added all the previous stuff into this model this agent. And now we're throwing in, this is the new thing. How's this different? What's the pros and cons? What do we have to worry about? What's the new compliance that we need to have? And then it creates all that stuff so that you can use it and be in the know, including when it starts. So it just frees up. I mean, in the past that would take people so much time to try to digest 100 pages of a document. I mean, even the CFPB, it's semi-annual report to Congress about all the things it's done and what's happening and stuff. I mean, I've taken all of those and made them into just a simple summary, 2-page summary of this is what they're up to, and this is where they're projected to be, and so on. I mean, you can just make everything so much easier by not having to wade through 100 to 500 pages of documents every single time.
Yeah, I think that's a very good internal use case that we have also found when replying to RFPs. I think Ray, you mentioned that in the beginning as well. It just makes it so much easier. You feed it all the company policies, data certifications, and everything that it needs to know. Now that and these tools are not very difficult to make in-house as well using some of these open source models. You can that will fill up the RFP for you. Of course, you need to proofread it once to make sure that everything is fine. But the effort required is only to proofread and not to figure out answers to each of these questions, looking at 20 different documents and figuring out which is the most appropriate one to use here. And while what I'm hearing mostly from collection agencies, the biggest requirement is, of course, can you replace my collector? And I'm sure Ralph would agree. Nobody likes to deal with people anymore, right? But wish we would be there where we could replace 100%, but not. I think there's still a few years before we get to that. But where I personally, I've seen a lot of people use it, especially who send out emails a lot. Acts as a very quick email structure tool. You say that here are the things that I want to write in an email. It quickly, gives you a structure. You can again proofread it. The mail that would have taken you maybe 30 minutes because you want to think 3 times over and kind of make sure it's right, takes you less than 5 minutes to write that email in now. And if you're doing that 3 times a day, that saves a lot of time and effort. Right. So I think those are the 3 use cases which we are seeing from an agency side and what we're doing internally.
I'm not necessarily trying to replace people. I mean, everybody's worried their job's going to get lost, right? But there are a lot of agencies, I don't know of any, that doesn't have a flag out saying looking for collectors,
Yeah,
And so if you can set up where the people that are being collectors and are good at it and stuff can continue to do well and be elevated, and then all the other stuff that, because it costs so much money, the first 90 days of hiring a collector is almost cost prohibitive. And then if they leave or you let them go, it's just money down the drain. I mean, the stuff that we do is less than 1 FTE. I mean, it is so affordable to make these kind of things happen. So yeah, I agree with you 100%. We can really help you in ways. In fact, the things that keep you up at night, that's the stuff that all of us want to hear, because that's the stuff that then we can build the next thing for you. I mean, everything we've built based on that idea or that concept of what's keeping you up at night. And then we try to fix that you don't have to worry about it. I mean, we can fix it and you can go on your day doing your business and not having to be masterful understanding, yes, but not completely in charge and masterful of all that stuff and how it works.
All right, we've got 4 minutes left, and there are 9 questions that I have and coming from the audience. Which has been great. It's
we are not an efficient group in answering questions, apparently.
No.
I should have had AI here to answer these questions. We'd have been in and out, and everyone would have been back to work already.
Next
Note
time,
to
the
self:
Ray
stop
avatar will show
inviting
up.
humans. Note to self: stop inviting humans.
My AI avatar will be available next month for your next meeting.
There you go. Let's see here. You know what? We've only got 4 minutes left. There's 4 of you. We'll just start to wrap things up. What I want each of you to do is to take a minute, and for everybody who's watching this, what's the first thing they should do? As soon as this webinar is over, they've learned all this new stuff about AI, about compliance, about kind of how everything's starting to sort of piece together. What's the first thing someone should do who's watching this webinar as soon as it's over? Ralph, I'll start with you.
Thank you. That I think sadly you're going to have to go back to school a little bit. You can do it online. You don't have to pay for this. A lot of free resources out there. But if you're new to the idea, you need to watch some YouTube videos about AI and what's going on and how it works so you understand it. 2 is fight your fear of it. You might have to do that before you start watching the videos. Just prep yourself. And then pick a tool. There's a million of them out there now, and there's going to be a million more next week. I've got a list of a bunch of them. Every one of these I come to, I hear about a new one. I write it down. I actually got a separate laptop just for this, so I don't break anything on my important ones. Not a new one, a used one. But just get a playground and start to dabble and play. And consult with experts on what you can do at work if you're going to start doing it there. I wouldn't wait much longer if you're not. So if at least automation, if you're not using, and not in-app automation. So all of our tools have automation built in, but this is automation that sits outside, can access this app, go to that app, and move things together and do things. And the last thing would be start simple. After recent presentation at Washington Collectors Association, I was talking with the guy. He's like, hey, I've got this group that does this thing, and there's all this easy stuff and then these really complex ones. I think I'll use RPA to do this really complex stuff and let them just knock out the simple stuff. And I was like, or you could use the RPA to do the simple stuff because it's a lot easier to do that, and it can do high volumes. They can take that off their plate, and then they can just do the stuff that you need somebody to think about that's really complex to program. So those are a few things. That's not one thing to do, but it's just, you're just going to have to start and start getting familiar with the lingo and start moving forward, figure out what makes sense for you. It's not going to make sense to dive all the way in for everybody immediately. Just do the next thing that makes sense.
Excellent. Thank you. Ray?
10 seconds. So Heath and TCAP some time. We've created a tool that allows you to learn that we can show you in a very short amount of time the very basics of what to look out for, what to do, and how to do it. And to what degree you want to learn, we will teach you to that point. And then as you understand it, then you won't be afraid of it, and you'll be able to do a lot more. So I've spent most of my time, and I suspect this will continue, just getting people up to speed on what generative AI can or can't do for you, what you need to look out for, and what you can be empowered to change and improve.
Excellent. Thank you. Heath?
Yeah, I think, it was touched on earlier, but just to reemphasize the point, you can use, you're going to be using AI technology either intentionally or unintentionally, because we're seeing more and more vendors that we use every day, from Microsoft to Adobe to Zoom, force AI technology in it. And so part of that intentional process is, setting up an AI policy, having an AI committee that is exploring this technology, how we can use it, and then even looking at creating an AI risk assessment before we launch or adopt a new vendor. What are our risks that are important for us or for our clients before we implement this in technology? So those are kind of 3 fundamental tools and checklists that I would start with. if you haven't already. And I've said this before, because if you don't have an AI policy that either that addresses how your employees and how your vendors use this, you will be having employees or vendors using AI without your knowledge. And that's really the important thing, is you want to make sure that you are directing how it's being used and not surprised that's being used or has been used for the past 6 months or year without your knowledge.
Excellent. Thanks. Pratik?
So yeah, I think the biggest and the most important piece is to right now go and try and educate yourself a little bit more on what AI is and how does it work on a broad level. And definitely a risk assessment sort of questions that you need answered before you could choose a vendor. I think education would also help you get more comfortable and start talking to people who are offering services, right? Whatever you think you need automation on, that education will help you ask the right questions to figure out whether this particular vendor is the right person or not. And then talking to more and more people to figure out what kind of solutions are out there is going to go a long distance.
Excellent. Well, Pratik, Ray, Ralph, Keith, I want to thank each of you so much for being here today on behalf of everybody who's watching and listening and walking away with a much deeper understanding and comprehension of AI and compliance and how things are sort of what the direction things are moving and what they should be doing to make sure they don't get left behind. Thanks to each of you for being here and sharing today. Pratik, I want to thank you and the team at Skit.ai one last time for sponsoring today's webinar. Everybody, please check them out at skit.ai. I also want to thank everyone who watched. Thank you for being here and giving us an hour of your time. If you're watching us live, we're back tomorrow with a webinar at 1 o'clock on scoring and how to improve your scoring metrics, your scoring analysis, your scoring tools to better identify consumers that are more willing to pay and more likely to pay. If you haven't signed up for that yet, there's a link in the chat that you can use to sign up, or you can check out the events calendar on accountrecovery.net. So we hope to see you back for that tomorrow at 1 o'clock. Until then, enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks so much for being here, and we look forward to seeing everybody soon. Thanks,
Thanks, Mike.
guys.
Thanks, everybody.